When the SEAL team was pinned down in the Kunar Mountains and facing annihilation, they heard shots cracking from an impossible position. "Where's that sniper? Who's shooting?" Lieutenant Bridges shouted into his comms, his voice cutting through the chaos. What they didn't know was that the ghost sniper saving their lives had just defied direct orders, and her identity would shock everyone at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hindu Kush mountains loomed over Forward Operating Base Sentinel like ancient sentinels guarding secrets too dark to speak aloud. Kunar Province, Afghanistan, summer 2012. The kind of place where the temperature swung from scorching heat to bone-chilling cold in hours, where every ridge could hide an enemy position, and where even the rocks seemed to hold grudges. This wasn't some training ground back in Virginia. This was the sharp end of the spear, where SEALs operated in the shadows and death came with the morning sun. Sergeant Kyra Vance stepped off the Chinook helicopter, her boots hitting the dusty tarmac with barely a sound. At 29, she looked nothing like the operators gathered around the Tactical Operations Center. No bulging muscles, no operator beard, no chest full of medals on display. Her fatigues were standard issue, faded from too many deployments. Her plate carrier was functional but worn, showing years of hard use, and slung across her back was an M110 semi-automatic sniper system that had clearly seen better days. The weapon was scarred, the finish worn in places where her hands had gripped it thousands of times, but it was clean and well-maintained, with the kind of care that spoke of deep respect. The operations area buzzed with that particular brand of pre-mission energy. SEALs moved with purpose, checking gear, conducting rehearsals, speaking in the shorthand of men who'd operated together long enough to communicate with glances. Their equipment gleamed with high-end modifications. Custom-painted rifles, the latest optics, communication systems that cost more than a new car. Everything about them screamed elite, expensive, and proven. Kiera found a spot near the perimeter, away from the main cluster of activity. She set her rifle case down with the kind of gentle precision most people reserve for newborns, unzipped it slowly, and began her ritual. A worn cloth appeared from her cargo pocket, and she started cleaning the barrel with smooth, practiced movements that looked almost meditative. "Check out the new attachment," a voice cut through the noise. Staff Sergeant Bryce Thornton stood with his arms crossed, his SEAL trident gleaming on his chest like a declaration of superiority. His custom MK-18 rifle hung from a three-point sling, every inch of it optimized and expensive. "Didn't know we were running a charity operation now." His buddy, Petty Officer Derek Romero, snorted as he adjusted his plate carrier. The man looked like he'd walked off a recruiting poster, all square jaw and confidence. "That's our Overwatch? Hammond must be scraping the bottom of the barrel. Look at that rifle. My dad had one just like it gathering dust in his closet." Chief Petty Officer Graham Kellaway walked past, his eyes flicking over Kiera with the kind of dismissive assessment that didn't even register her as a threat or an asset. Just another body taking up space. "Better hope we don't need precision shooting," he muttered to Tyler Watts, who grinned in response. Kiera's fingers never paused in their steady work. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the comments floating through the air like smoke. She just kept cleaning, her movements as steady as a heartbeat, like she'd heard it all before and filed it away in a place that didn't matter. A shadow fell across her workspace. Lieutenant Nathan Havoc Bridges, the SEAL team leader, stood with his hands on his hips. His reputation preceded him. 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and the kind of tactical mind that had kept his team alive through operations that existed only in classified files. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp, but there was something dismissive in the set of his jaw. "Vance," he said, his voice flat and professional, but lacking warmth. "You're assigned as backup overwatch for Operation Silent Thunder. You'll maintain position on Ridge 7, Watch R6, and only engage if specifically authorized. Clear?" "Clear, sir," Kiara replied, her voice steady and low.
She slid the bolt back on her rifle, checked the chamber with practiced ease, and set it down with care. Bridges studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. This isn't a training exercise. This is a high-value target operation in hostile territory. We need operators who can think fast and follow orders without hesitation. Can you handle that? Yes, sir. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded once and walked away, already talking into his radio about logistics and insertion points. Thornton waited until Bridges was out of earshot before stepping closer to Kiera's position. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to something that tried to sound helpful but came out patronizing. "Stay on your ridge, keep your head down, and don't do anything stupid. The adults will handle the real work." Kiera's hand tightened on the cleaning cloth for just a fraction of a second. Then it relaxed. She pulled out a small toolkit and made a minute adjustment to her scope, a tiny click that somehow seemed to cut through all the surrounding noise. But one person was watching more carefully than the others. Master Chief Isaiah Garrett stood in the shadow of the operations building, his grizzled face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. At 52, he'd seen more combat than most of these hotshots combined, and he'd learned long ago that the quietest people were often the most dangerous. Something about the way Vance moved, the precision of her ritual, the deliberate care she showed her weapon, it stirred old memories of specialized training programs that officially didn't exist. As the sun began its descent toward the jagged mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the base, Kiera finished her preparations. She checked her ammunition, counted rounds with the kind of focus most people reserved for life or death decisions, and packed everything with systematic precision. Tomorrow, Operation Silent Thunder would launch. A high-value Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters in a compound 15 clicks into the mountains. The SEALs would go in fast and hard, capture or kill the target and extract before the enemy could respond. And Kiera Vance would be watching from a ridge, dismissed as backup, underestimated by everyone who mattered, exactly where she needed to be.
The briefing room at FOB Sentinel was packed with bodies and egos. Maps covered every wall, satellite imagery displayed on screens that flickered with the blue glow of classified intelligence. The air was thick with the smell of gun oil, stale coffee, and the particular tension that came before high-stakes operations. This wasn't a planning session. This was the final check before operators put their lives on the line. Captain Stuart Hammond stood at the front, his uniform crisp despite the heat, his bearing that of a man who'd commanded respect through rank, rather than earning it through shared hardship. He'd been stationed at Sentinel for 6 months, long enough to develop opinions about how things should run, but not long enough to understand the complexities of mountain warfare. Kiera entered the room quietly, finding a spot along the back wall where she could see the maps but stay out of the way. Her rifle was slung across her back, and she carried a worn notebook that had seen deployments across 3 continents. The SEAL team occupied the front rows like they owned the space. Bridges sat with his arms crossed, his focus absolute. Thornton and Ramiro whispered to each other, occasionally glancing back at Kiera with smirks that weren't meant to be subtle. Calloway was checking his gear for the 3rd time, his movements sharp and practiced. "All right, listen up," Hammond's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Operation Silent Thunder launches at 0400. Our target is Zahir Massoud, high-value Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces. Intelligence puts him at a compound in the Pech River Valley, meeting with foreign fighters from Chechnya and Pakistan." He tapped the map, indicating a cluster of buildings nestled in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges. SEAL Team 7 will insert via helicopter 2 clicks north, approach on foot, and execute a capture or kill operation. Primary objective is Massoud. Secondary is any intelligence we can gather on his network. Bridges leaned forward. "What about enemy strength?" "Intelligence estimates 15 to 20 fighters. Standard AK-47s, maybe some RPGs. Nothing your team hasn't handled before." Tyler Watts raised his hand. "Overwatch positions?" Hammond's eyes flicked to Kiera, and something in his expression suggested he found her presence in the room mildly annoying. "Sergeant Vance will provide overwatch from Ridge 7. Backup only.
She's there in case things go sideways, but frankly, I don't expect you'll need her." The dismissal in his tone was crystal clear. Not backup support. Backup as in afterthought. Thornton turned in his seat, making sure his voice carried. "Ridge 7? That's what, 800 meters from the target? Pretty far out for someone who's never operated with a SEAL team before." 940 meters, Kira said quietly from the back, her eyes still on her notebook. "Elevation advantage of 300 feet. Clear line of sight to the compound and the northern approach. Wind patterns favor left to right at approximately 4 miles per hour this time of morning." The room went quiet for a moment. Several heads turned to look at her. Romero broke the silence with a laugh that was meant to sting. "Oh, she's done her homework. That's cute. You memorized that from a manual, or did someone help you with the math?" "The math isn't complicated," Kira replied, her tone unchanged. She didn't look up from her notes. "Basic ballistics. Any competent shooter would know it." "Any competent shooter," Romero repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hear that, boys? We've got an expert in the room. Never mind that we've been doing this for years. Never mind that we've operated in these mountains more times than we can count."
Calloway joined in, his voice carrying the weight of someone who considered himself a tactical authority. "Ridge 7 is a passive position. You sit, you watch, you report if you see something. That's it. This isn't a video game where you rack up a kill count. This is real combat, and it requires real experience." "Which you clearly don't have," added a younger SEAL named Petty Officer Jake Hensley. His face was sunburned, his gear still relatively new. He was trying to fit in with the veterans, and mocking the outsider was an easy way to earn points. "I mean, look at that rifle. My grandfather carried something like that in Desert Storm. You should be in a museum, not on Overwatch for a SEAL operation." Kira's fingers tightened on her pen for just a heartbeat. Then she wrote something in her notebook and remained silent. Hammond cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the briefing. "Vance is assigned to this operation by order of JSOC. I don't like it any more than you do, but we follow orders. She stays on her ridge, maintains radio silence unless absolutely necessary, and does not engage unless specifically authorized by me. Clear?" "Crystal, sir," Bridges said, his eyes still on the map, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was already writing off Kira as irrelevant to the operation's success. After the briefing, as operators filed out to conduct final equipment checks, Thornton made sure to intercept Kira in the narrow corridor outside the operations center. He stepped into her path, close enough to be intimidating, his bulk blocking her way. "Let me give you the real briefing," he said, his voice low and aggressive. "You're here because some desk jockey at JSOC thinks we need diversity points or whatever political bullshit is popular this month. But out there," he gestured toward the mountains, "out there, your feelings don't matter. Your little notebook doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't screw up and get real operators killed." Kira met his eyes steadily. She was 6 inches shorter than him, outweighed by at least 60 pounds, but something in her gaze made Thornton shift his weight slightly. "I'll do my job, you do yours." She stepped around him and continued down the corridor, her movements calm and unhurried. Romero caught up to Thornton, watching Kira's back as she disappeared around a corner. "Think she'll fold when the shooting starts?" "Doesn't matter," Thornton replied. "She's 900 meters away. By the time she figures out what's happening, we'll already have handled it." But not everyone shared their certainty. Master Chief Garrett had watched the entire exchange from the shadows of an alcove, his weathered face unreadable. He'd seen something in Kira's responses, in the way she'd calculated that range and windage without hesitation, in the quiet confidence that didn't need to defend itself. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to an old friend in Naval Special Warfare Command. Simple message. "Need background check on Sergeant Kira Vance, sniper, currently assigned FOB Sentinel. Something doesn't add up." The response came back within minutes. "Records classified. Need higher clearance." Garrett stared at his phone. In 30 years of military service, he'd never seen a sergeant's records classified at a level requiring special clearance. That meant one of two things.
Either Vance was involved in something extremely sensitive, or someone had gone to great lengths to hide her background. Either way, tomorrow's operation just got a lot more interesting.
The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around FOB Sentinel like a shroud. It was 0300 hours, and the base had that particular quality of stillness that came before operations. Not peaceful, but tense, like a coiled spring waiting to release. The mountains were invisible beyond the perimeter lights, but everyone could feel them out there, watching, waiting, hiding dangers that wouldn't reveal themselves until it was too late. Kira sat cross-legged on her cot in the female quarters, a small room she shared with two intelligence analysts who were currently on night shift. Her gear was laid out before her with mathematical precision, magazines loaded and counted, water bladder filled and tested, medical kit checked and rechecked, communications equipment verified, and at the center of it all, her M110 rifle, disassembled and spread across a clean cloth like the components of something sacred. Her fingers moved through the familiar ritual of final inspection, each part examined, each mechanism tested, each connection verified. This wasn't paranoia, this was survival. In the mountains, your equipment was the only thing standing between you and death. And she'd learned long ago that the time to discover a malfunction wasn't when someone's life depended on your shot. She picked up a single round, holding it to the light. The brass casing gleamed, and she turned it slowly, checking for any imperfection. Her teacher had drilled this into her until it became more instinct than habit. The difference between life and death, he'd said, his voice gravelly and worn from years of classified operations, is often measured in fractions of an inch and split seconds. Perfect preparation gives you both. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find Corporal Marcus Diaz standing in the doorway, his face young and uncertain. He was a Marine assigned to base security, maybe 22 years old, with a kind of eagerness that hadn't yet been worn down by deployments. "Sergeant Vance," he said quietly, glancing down the corridor to make sure no one was listening. I heard you're going out with the SEALs tomorrow." Kira nodded, setting down the round and giving her his attention. Diaz shifted his weight, his hands fidgeting with the radio on his belt. "I just wanted to say, I've heard what people are saying about you, and I don't think it's right. My brother served with a specialized sniper unit in Iraq. He used to tell me stories about operators who could make shots that shouldn't be possible. He called them shadows because nobody ever saw them work, but their results spoke for themselves." He paused, building courage for what he wanted to say next. "He said the best ones were always quiet. Never bragged, never showed off, just did the job and disappeared. You remind me of those stories." Kira studied him for a moment, seeing past his youth to something genuine underneath. "Your brother still serving?" "No, ma'am. He was killed 3 years ago, Hindu Province. Sniper took him during a patrol." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of shared loss. "I'm sorry," Kira said simply. No platitudes, no empty promises about honor and sacrifice, just acknowledgement of Cain that didn't have easy answers. Diaz nodded, blinking rapidly. "Just be careful out there tomorrow, and don't let them make you doubt yourself. I've seen you on the practice range. You're better than most of them want to admit." He left before she could respond, his boots echoing down the corridor. Kira returned to her rifle, but Diaz's words lingered in the quiet room. It had been 3 years since her last deployment, 3 years since the operation that had ended with medals she couldn't display and commendations that existed only in classified files. 3 years of trying to blend back into normal military life, of accepting regular assignments, of pretending that the specialized training had never happened. But pretending didn't erase muscle memory. It didn't erase the countless hours spent learning techniques that officially didn't exist, mastered under the guidance of an instructor whose name appeared in no personnel records. It didn't erase the 47 confirmed eliminations from positions that intelligence had deemed impossible. She reassembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, the pieces fitting together with satisfying clicks. When she was done, she ran her thumb over a small mark etched into the stock, 3 parallel lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Her teacher's signature,
carved into the weapon before he'd vanished into whatever shadows retired ghosts disappeared into.
At 0345, Kira made her way to the staging area. The SEAL team was already there, conducting final checks under the harsh lights of the operations building. Their movements were efficient and professional, the product of thousands of hours of training and multiple deployments together. Whatever else they were good at their jobs. Lieutenant Bridges gathered his team for a final brief. Insertion in 15 minutes. We go fast, we go quiet, we complete the mission, and we extract. Kellaway, you're on point. Watson-Romero, you've got flanks. Hensley, you're with me on entry. Questions? What about Overwatch? Calloway asked, jerking his thumb toward where Kira stood checking her own gear. Vance maintains position on Ridge 7. She's there if we need her, but the plan doesn't depend on her. We execute as briefed. She's insurance, nothing more. Thornton made sure his voice carried across the staging area. Hope that insurance policy doesn't have too many exclusions, like void if operator can't actually shoot under pressure. A few chuckles rippled through the team, not mean-spirited now, just the gallows humor that came before operations. But the underlying dismissal was clear. Kira was backup that they didn't expect to need and didn't particularly want. Captain Hammond appeared from the operations center, his face illuminated by the screen of his tablet. Final approval from command. Operation Silent Thunder is greenlit. Weather window is optimal. Intelligence confirms target is still at the compound. You have authorization for capture or kill. He looked directly at Kira, his expression making it clear that he considered her presence a formality imposed from above. Sergeant Vance, you will maintain radio discipline. You will not engage unless I specifically authorize it. You will report any enemy movement that threatens the team, but you will not take independent action. Am I absolutely clear? Yes, sir, Kira replied, her voice steady. Because if you deviate from these orders for any reason, I will personally ensure that your career ends the moment we return to base. I don't care what strings someone pulled to get you on this operation. Out there, you follow my commands. Understood? Understood, sir. Hammond nodded, satisfied that he'd established control. He turned to Bridges. Your operation, Lieutenant. Bring your team home. The helicopters were spooning up on the landing pad, their rotors cutting through the pre-dawn darkness with a rhythmic thrum that felt like a heartbeat. Kira grabbed her gear and moved toward the separate bird that would insert her on Ridge 7. The SEAL team was loading into their own Blackhawk, their movements coordinated and professional. As Kira passed Thornton, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. Try not to embarrass yourself out there. Bad enough we have to babysit you. Don't make us rescue you, too. She didn't respond. She just kept walking, her rifle case secure, her mind already shifting into the focus state that would sustain her through the next hours. The mockery, the dismissal, the doubt, it all faded into background noise. Because soon, the only things that would matter were wind speed, distance, and whether she could make the shots that nobody believed she could make. Master Chief Garrett watched from the operations center as both helicopters lifted off, their navigation lights disappearing into the darkness over the mountains. He'd tried to pull Vance's complete file one more time, but the classification barriers remained impenetrable. Something about this operation felt wrong. Not the tactical plan, that was sound, but the way everyone had so thoroughly dismissed Vance, the way Hammond had gone out of his way to constrain her, the way the SEAL team treated her like a liability rather than an asset. He'd been in the military long enough to recognize when egos were interfering with mission effectiveness, and he'd been in combat long enough to know that underestimating the quiet ones was how good people ended up dead. He poured himself another cup of coffee and settled in to monitor the operation. By the time the sun rose over the Hindu Kush, he suspected everyone's assumptions about Sergeant Kira Vance were going to be tested in ways none of them expected.
The Black Hawk cut through the darkness like a blade, its rotors chopping the thin mountain air with a rhythmic thunder that Kira felt in her chest. Through the open door, she could see nothing but blackness. The mountains below were invisible, the stars above obscured by clouds. The only light came from the red glow of the cockpit instruments and the faint green illumination of night vision devices. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Ridge 7, 2 minutes. Kira checked her harness one final time and adjusted her rifle case. The helicopter banked hard, following the contours of the terrain, flying nap of the earth to avoid detection. Her stomach lurched with the sudden movement, but her hands remained steady on her equipment. Below and 3 clicks to the south, the SEAL team's Black Hawk was making its own approach, invisible in the darkness.
They'd insert first, begin their movement to the target compound, and be in position before dawn broke. By the time the sun touched these mountains, the operation would be over, one way or another. The Black Hawk flared suddenly, its nose pulling up, as the pilots brought it into a hover just meters above the ridge. "Go, go, go!" the crew chief shouted, slapping Kira's shoulder. She fast-roped down into darkness, her boots hitting rocky ground with a jarring impact. The moment her weight was off the rope, the helicopter banked away, its sound fading quickly as it dropped back into the valley. Within seconds, she was alone in absolute silence. Kira remained motionless for a full minute, letting her eyes adjust, listening to the mountain. The wind whispered through rocks and sparse vegetation. Somewhere far below, water trickled over stone, but no human sounds, no movement, nothing that suggested she'd been detected. She activated her night vision and began moving toward her overwatch position. The ridge was exactly as the satellite imagery had shown, a rocky spine running north-south, with a clear view down into the valley where the target compound sat. She moved slowly, testing each footfall, avoiding loose rocks that might betray her position with sound. It took her 20 minutes to reach the optimal position, a natural depression behind a cluster of boulders that would provide cover and concealment. She arranged the rocks slightly, creating a stable rest for her rifle, then unpacked her gear with methodical precision. Spotting scope on a small tripod, rangefinder positioned for quick access, radio checked and set to the operations frequency. Everything within arm's reach, everything positioned for maximum efficiency. She assembled her rifle, the familiar weight settling into her hands like an old friend. The scope caps came off and she began the careful process of ranging the terrain below. The compound was still dark, no lights showing. Intelligence had said the meeting wouldn't start until after morning prayers, which gave the SEAL team time to get into position. Kira's radio crackled softly. "Overwatch, this is Havoc 6. Radio check?" "Overwatch, this is Havoc 6. Radio reads you Lima Charlie," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Copy. Maintain position and silence unless you observe enemy activity. Havoc 6 out." She settled into her position, becoming part of the landscape. This was what she'd been trained for, not the shooting, though that was important, but this, the ability to remain motionless for hours, to observe without being observed, to become invisible while maintaining absolute awareness of everything around her. Through her spotting scope, she watched the SEAL team's insertion point. They would be moving through the northern wadi now, approaching the compound from the high ground. Good tactical thinking. The approach gave them cover and put the rising sun at their backs when it came up. But something was bothering her, a feeling more than anything concrete. She scanned the valley methodically, sector by sector, looking for anything out of place. There, on the eastern ridge, about 800 meters from the compound, a faint irregularity in the terrain that her eye caught but couldn't immediately identify. She adjusted her scope, increased magnification, and felt her pulse quicken. It was a fighting position, camouflaged, well-constructed, and occupied. She could see the faint heat signature through her thermal optic, at least 2, maybe 3 people. And they were watching the northern approach, exactly where the SEAL team would be coming from. Kira keyed her radio. "Havoc 6, Overwatch, possible enemy position on Eastern Ridge Grid November Victor 378421. At least 2 personnel, appears to be an observation post." The response came back immediately, but it wasn't Bridges. It was Captain Hammond, monitoring from the operations center. "Overwatch, Command, what's your confidence level on that assessment?" "High confidence, sir. I have visual and thermal confirmation."
There was a pause. When Hammond's voice came back, it carried an edge of annoyance. "Overwatch, intelligence indicated no enemy presence outside the target compound. You're probably seeing local shepherds or farmers. Do not, I repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. Command out." Kara stared at her scope, watching the position. Shepherds didn't build camouflaged fighting positions. Farmers didn't maintain armed watch in the pre-dawn darkness. But Hammond had made his position clear. She keyed her radio again. "Havoc 6 Overwatch. Recommend altering approach vector to avoid potential observation." This time, Bridges responded directly, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation. "Overwatch, we've planned this approach for 3 days based on solid intelligence. We're not changing the plan because you think you see something. Maintain radio silence unless you have confirmed enemy contact. Havoc 6 out." Kara watched the enemy position through her scope. One of the men was now on a radio, talking to someone, reporting. She swept her scope toward the compound and felt ice form in her stomach. The compound wasn't asleep anymore. Through the thermal optic, she could see movement. People waking up, moving with purpose. Not the slow stirring of people roused from sleep, but the quick, coordinated movement of people responding to a warning. Havoc 6, Overwatch. The compound is active, multiple personnel moving. They may have been alerted. Overwatch, command. Hammond's voice cut her off, sharp and final. You will maintain radio discipline. The compound always has guards. You're seeing normal activity and misinterpreting it. Do not disrupt this operation with unfounded speculation. Is that clear? Kara watched 3 more men emerge from a building in the compound, carrying weapons. They weren't guards on normal patrol. They were setting up defensive positions. Sir, I'm observing coordinated defensive preparations. Sergeant Vance. Hammond's voice cracked through the radio like a whip. You have been given a direct order to maintain radio silence. The next time you transmit without observing confirmed enemy action against our forces, you will face formal charges. Do you understand? Kara's finger hovered over the transmit button. Every instinct she had was screaming that the SEAL team was walking into an ambush. The observation post on the ridge, the compound's sudden activity, the way people were moving, it all pointed to one conclusion. They knew the SEALs were coming. But Hammond had made it clear. One more transmission and her career was over. And even if she transmitted, would they listen? Bridges had already dismissed her warning. Hammond had characterized her observations as speculation. She watched through her scope as the SEAL team continued their approach, visible now as thermal signatures moving through the wadi. They had maybe 10 minutes before they reached the compound, 10 minutes before they walked into whatever was waiting for them. Kara's hand moved to her rifle, checking the chamber, verifying her 0. The range to the observation post was 847 meters. Wind was still light, left to right at about 4 miles per hour. Elevation angle required a slight adjustment to her holdover. She could take out the observation post, 2, maybe 3 quick shots, eliminate the enemy's eyes before they could coordinate the ambush. But that would be firing without authorization, and Hammond had been explicit about his orders. The radio crackled again. Bridges' voice, calm and professional. Overwatch approaching phase line Alpha. 5 minutes to target, all elements report. The other team members checked in one by one. Everything proceeding according to plan. Nobody seeing what Kara was seeing. Nobody understanding what was about to happen. She watched the men in the observation post. One of them was now looking through binoculars, scanning the wadi where the SEAL team was approaching. Any second now, he would spot them. And when he did, the ambush would be sprung. Kara's crosshairs settled on the man with the binoculars. Her breathing slowed. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Not yet. She had maybe 90 seconds to decide whether to follow orders and watch good men walk into an ambush or defy direct commands and do what she'd been trained to do. The man with the binoculars suddenly tensed. He'd seen something. His hand went to his radio. Kara's decision crystallized in that instant. She'd accepted a lot of things in her career, being underestimated, being dismissed, being treated as if her skills didn't matter. But she would not accept watching operators die because commanders were too arrogant to listen. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. She took a breath, released half of it, and let the mountain wind tell her its secrets. Some orders, she realized, were meant to be broken.
The shot broke the mountain silence like thunder cracking through a clear sky. Through her scope, Kira watched the man with the binoculars drop, his radio falling from his hand and tumbling down the rocky slope. Before his body hit the ground, she'd already shifted to the second target, her crosshairs finding the fighter who was reaching for his weapon. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Another hit. Clean. The third man in the observation post dove for cover, but he was moving exactly where Kira had anticipated. Her third shot caught him mid-motion, and he collapsed behind the rocks that wouldn't protect him anymore. 3 shots, 4.2 seconds, 3 threats eliminated. Her radio exploded with voices, all of them shouting at once. Contact! Contact! Who's shooting? Where's that fire coming from? Havoc 6, we have sniper fire, unknown origin. Captain Hammond's voice cut through the chaos like a chainsaw. Overwatch! Overwatch! Did you just engage? Report immediately. Kira kept her eye on the scope, scanning for additional threats. Overwatch to all elements. Enemy observation post neutralized. 3 hostiles eliminated. Compound is alert and responding. You were ordered not to engage. Hammond's voice was nearly incoherent with rage. You just compromised the entire operation. Abort. All elements, abort and return to. Negative. Lieutenant Bridges' voice overrode Hammond's order. We're already at the compound perimeter. Enemy knows we're here. We push through or we're sitting ducks in this wadi. All elements, execute assault now, now, now. Kira watched through her scope as the situation unfolded with terrible speed. The compound erupted like a disturbed anthill. Men poured out of buildings, at least 30 of them, twice the number intelligence had estimated. They weren't panicking or confused. They were moving to pre-positioned fighting positions, setting up interlocking fields of fire, coordinating their defense with the precision of people who've been waiting for exactly this moment. It had been a trap all along. The intelligence had been fed to them deliberately. The meeting was real, but it was bait, and the SEAL team had walked right into it. Havoc 6, taking heavy fire, Bridges' voice crackled through the radio, punctuated by the distinct crack of AK-47s and the deeper boom of RPGs. We're pinned down at the north wall. Need immediate support. Through her thermal optic, Kira could see the heat signatures of the SEAL team pressed against the compound's northern perimeter wall. They'd made it to the objective, but now they were trapped. 30 meters of open ground separated them from any cover, and the enemy had them in a perfect kill zone. Overwatch, this is command. Hammond's voice had regained some control, but it shook with barely contained fury. You are ordered to cease fire and withdraw to extraction point. You have violated direct orders and endangered... Kira switched off her radio. She knew what that meant. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, the end of everything she'd built. But right now, 7 operators were pinned down and facing odds that would kill them all in the next 5 minutes if someone didn't do something. Her scope swept the compound. She could see fighters moving into position on the rooftops, setting up PKM machine guns that would shred the SEAL team the moment they tried to move. More fighters were flanking around the eastern wall, trying to get behind the Americans' position. Her training took over, her mind shifting into a state of absolute clarity where time seemed to slow and every detail crystallized with perfect precision. Her teacher's voice echoed in her memory. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight fair. You become death itself. You make them fear the shadows. She acquired her first target, a fighter on the northern rooftop, setting up a machine gun with a clear line of sight to the SEAL team. Range, 943 meters. Wind, 5 miles per hour, quartering left. Elevation angle, negative 12 degrees. The rifle spoke. The fighter dropped. Second target, another machine gunner on the eastern building. The weapon was already positioned, the shooter beginning to aim. Kira's shot caught him in the upper chest, and he toppled backward off the roof. Third target, a man with an RPG rising from cover to take a shot at the pinned-down SEALs. The rocket-propelled grenade would kill or wound most of the team if it connected. Kira's bullet found him before he could fire, and the RPG clattered to the ground unfired. "Where the hell is that sniper?" someone screamed over the enemy radio frequency that Kira was monitoring through her scanner. "He's picking us off! Find him!" But they were looking in the wrong direction, scanning the near ridges, not realizing the shots were coming from nearly a kilometer away, from a position they'd never thought to cover.
Her radio crackled back to life. She'd turned it off, but someone at the operations center had overridden her controls, forcing the channel open. Unknown sniper, this is Havoc 6. Bridges' voice was tight with stress, but steady with professional control. I don't know who you are or where you're shooting from, but you just saved our asses. Keep it up. Jesus Christ, Calloway's voice broke in. Did you see that shot? Had to be 900 meters, in this wind. That's not possible. It's Overwatch, Romero said, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. It has to be. She's the only one in position. Overwatch? Thornton's voice cracked with shock. That's impossible. Nobody's that good. Nobody can... His words were cut off by another burst of gunfire. Closer now. The enemy was trying to rush the SEAL team's position, using sheer numbers to overwhelm them. Kira shifted her focus. The charging fighters were moving fast, using cover, presenting difficult targets. But she'd trained for this. Her teacher had made her practice on moving targets until she could predict movement patterns, anticipate where a running man would be by the time the bullet arrived. She fired. A fighter dropped mid-stride. Fired again. Another one fell. The charge faltered as the survivors realized they were being cut down by shots they couldn't see coming from a direction they couldn't identify. "She's dropping them like targets at a shooting gallery," Watts breathed into his radio. "How is this even possible?" Through her scope, Kira saw a new threat emerging. A technical truck, a pickup with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was racing toward the compound from the south. The .50 caliber weapon it carried would tear through the SEAL team's body armor like paper. And it was coming in fast, the gunner already swinging the weapon toward the American's position. Range to target, 1,124 meters. Moving target, approximately 40 miles per hour. Wind had shifted, now blowing 8 miles per hour from the northwest. The shot required leading the target, compensating for bullet drop over more than a kilometer, adjusting for the Coriolis effect at this distance, and doing it all before the gunner could open fire. Her teacher's voice. Some shots define everything. Not because they're the hardest, but because they're the ones where failure means people die. Kira's breathing slowed to nothing. Her finger applied pressure to the trigger with the precision of a surgeon. The world narrowed to nothing but the crosshairs, the target, and the space between them. The rifle bucked. For one endless second, nothing happened. The truck kept racing forward, the gunner's hand on the .50 cal, preparing to unleash hell. Then the driver's window exploded, and the truck veered violently left, plowing into a stone wall and flipping onto its side. The gunner was thrown clear, the heavy weapon clattering uselessly into the dirt. The radio was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Bridges' voice, quiet, with something that might have been reverence. Did she just hit the driver of a moving vehicle at over 1,000 meters? Nobody can make that shot, Calloway said, but his voice carried no conviction. That's not humanly possible. Havoc 6 to unknown sniper, Bridges said, his professional composure cracking slightly. We are advancing to secure the objective. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're the only reason we're still alive. Kira didn't respond. She was already scanning for the next threat, her rifle tracking smoothly across the compound. The enemy was breaking now, their coordinated defense collapsing into chaos as fighters realized they were being systematically eliminated by a ghost they couldn't see or fight. But in the operations center back at FOB Sentinel, Captain Hammond was watching the feed from the SEAL team's helmet cameras, and his face had gone white with a mixture of rage and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Get me her file," he snapped at the intelligence officer. "I want to know everything about Sergeant Kira Vance. Everything. Right now." Master Chief Garrett stood in the shadows of the operations center, watching the tactical display and listening to the radio chatter. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You're not going to find what you're looking for in any file you can access. But if you're smart, Captain, you'll stop talking about court-martial and start thinking about how to explain why you almost got a SEAL team killed because you were too arrogant to listen." On Ridge 7, Kira Vance continued her work, each shot a promise kept, each target eliminated, a life saved. The mountain wind whispered its secrets to her, and she translated them into impossible shots that were rewriting everything the people watching thought they knew about the limits of human capability.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The compound was chaos incarnate. Smoke billowed from burning vehicles. Small fires crackled where RPG rounds had impacted, and the air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Through her scope, Kira watched the SEAL team breach the main building, their movements precise despite the hell they'd just survived. But the fight wasn't over. Her thermal optic picked up movement on the western ridge, approximately 1,200 meters from her position,
More fighters were arriving as reinforcements, at least a dozen of them, carrying heavy weapons and moving with the discipline of trained soldiers rather than militia. These weren't local Taliban. The way they moved, their equipment, their tactical coordination, these were foreign fighters, probably the Chechens that intelligence had mentioned. And they were setting up a mortar position. Kira watched through her scope as they unpacked the tube, assembled the base plate, and began preparing rounds. Once that mortar was operational, it would rain high explosive shells directly onto the compound where the SEAL team was operating. Body armor meant nothing against indirect fire. One well-placed mortar round could kill or wound the entire team. She keyed her radio, which someone had forced back online. Havoc 6, Overwatch. Enemy reinforcements on Western Ridge. Grid November, Victor 4, 1, 2, 7, 8, 5. Mortar team setting up. Range to your position approximately 400 meters. They'll be firing in 60 seconds. Can you take them? Bridges' voice was strained, punctuated by bursts of automatic fire in the background. We're still clearing the compound. Can't disengage. Kira studied the target through her scope. 1,200 meters, uphill shot. Wind had picked up to 10 miles per hour, gusting to 15, and the targets were partially concealed behind rocks, moving, working on their weapon system with urgent efficiency. Working on it, she replied. Her first shot took the mortar team leader, the man coordinating the setup. He dropped, and the others froze momentarily, scanning for the threat they couldn't see. But training took over, and they continued their work. Another man picked up where the leader had left off. Kira's second shot found him before he could give his first order. The remaining fighters dove for cover, but they were committed now. They'd come too far, carried too much equipment up that ridge to abandon the mortar. One of them low-crawled toward the tube, trying to finish the setup while staying beneath the line of fire. Through her scope, Kara watched him move. Predictable pattern, heading toward the only position where he could work the weapon. She led him by 3 feet, adjusted for the wind that was trying to push her bullet right, and fired. The man stopped moving. The remaining fighters opened fire toward her position, their AK-47s barking in rapid succession, but they were shooting at where they thought she might be, sending rounds randomly into the ridgeline. At 1,200 meters, the effective range of their weapons, the bullets were falling short or going wide by dozens of meters. Kira didn't move. She just kept working through the targets with methodical precision. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, and final. The fighters tried to move the mortar to salvage their mission, but every time someone exposed themselves, Kira's rifle spoke and another threat was eliminated. Havoc 6, Overwatch. What's your status on that mortar team? Bridges called out, his voice tight. Neutralized. 11 hostiles eliminated, 1 retreating south. There was a pause on the radio. Then Watts's voice filled with something between awe and disbelief. 11? She just said 11. How many rounds is that? 14. Kira had answered, having tracked each shot automatically. 3 misses on moving targets in high wind. 3 misses, Romero repeated. She's apologizing for an 80% hit rate at 1,200 meters on moving targets. What the hell are we dealing with here? Inside the compound, the SEAL team had secured the primary target. Zahir Massoud was dead, killed in the initial assault. But they'd also found something else. Intelligence documents, computer drives, maps showing planned attacks across the province. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a command center, and the enemy's response made sense now. They hadn't been protecting one high-value target, they'd been protecting an entire network. Havoc 6 to command. Primary objective secure, secondary objectives retrieved. But we've stirred up a hornet's nest. We need extract ASAP. Captain Hammond's voice came through, and he sounded like a man who had been arguing with his superiors for the past 10 minutes. Havoc 6 extraction birds are spun up, ETA to your location 12 minutes. Can you hold?
With our guardian angel, yeah, Bridges replied. Overwatch, hope you've got ammo left. We're about to have company. Kira had already seen them. Her scope swept the valley below, and what she saw made her stomach tighten. More fighters were converging on the compound from multiple directions. Not disorganized militia, but coordinated elements moving with tactical precision. They'd called in everyone, pulling fighters from surrounding areas to trap the Americans before they could escape. She counted at least 40 hostiles approaching from 3 different directions. The SEAL team was 7 men, low on ammunition after the sustained firefight, and they had to hold for 12 minutes against overwhelming odds. Through her scope, Kira watched the lead element of enemy fighters moving up a wadi to the south. They were using good tactical movement, bounding overwatch, staying in cover. Professional soldiers who knew what they were doing. Her rifle tracked the point man. Squeezed. He dropped. The second man moved to take his position. Dropped. The third man tried to pull back. Dropped. The enemy element went to ground, pinned by fire from a shooter they couldn't locate, but the other groups kept coming and Kira couldn't be everywhere at once. A fighter on the eastern approach stood up to throw a grenade toward the compound. Kira's shot caught him mid-throw, and the grenade fell short, detonating harmlessly against the compound's outer wall. Another group tried to rush the northern entrance while the SEALs were focused on the southern approach. Kira shifted her aim and dropped the first 3 runners. The assault faltered. "She's everywhere," Hensley said over the radio, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been fear. "It's like she can see everything, shoot anywhere. How is one person doing this?" Thornton's voice came through, shaken and humbled. "I don't know, but I take back every damn thing I said about her. That woman is saving our lives." Kira's ammunition was running low. She'd brought 120 rounds, standard for an Overwatch mission. She was down to 37, and the enemy kept coming. Her scope found a new threat, a group of fighters setting up a recoilless rifle on a ridge to the east. The weapon would punch through the compound walls and kill everyone inside. Range, 1,340 meters. Extreme distance, pushing the limits of her weapon system and her abilities. She adjusted for the increased range, the wind that was gusting unpredictably, the upward angle. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to nothing but the target and the space her bullet would travel through. She fired. Through the scope, she watched the spotter next to the recoilless rifle suddenly drop. Not a kill shot, she'd been aiming for the gunner and the wind had pushed her bullet left, but close enough that the weapon crew abandoned their position, diving for cover. Her follow-up shot found the gunner as he tried to reposition. The recoilless rifle lay abandoned, its threat neutralized. 8 minutes to extract, Hammond announced. Havoc 6, what's your status? We're holding, but only because Overwatch is performing miracles up there. I've never seen shooting like this. Never. Kellaway's voice cut in, professional, but carrying an undertone of respect that hadn't been there before. I've operated with scout snipers, Delta Force, the best shooters the military has. Nobody shoots like this. Nobody. On Ridge 7, Kira reloaded her last magazine. 20 rounds left. 8 minutes to hold. 40-plus hostiles still active and trying to overrun the compound. The mathematics weren't in their favor, but mathematics didn't account for training that existed in no official records, techniques that were classified above top secret, and a sniper who'd been taught by a ghost that the impossible was just a matter of proper preparation. Her scope swept the battlefield, prioritizing threats, calculating angles, reading the wind like a language only she understood. Each shot had to count now. Each bullet had to eliminate not just a target, but the highest priority threat to the men she was protecting. Through her scope, she saw an enemy commander trying to coordinate an assault, screaming orders, rallying his fighters for one final push before the helicopters arrived. He was the linchpin. Take him down, and the attack would lose coordination. Range, 1,180 meters. Moving target, ducking between cover, wind pushing hard from the left. One shot, one chance.
The Blackhawks came in low and fast, their rotors beating the air like war drums. The SEAL team laid down suppressive fire as the helicopters flared into the compound, their door gunners adding their own firepower to the chaos. Within 90 seconds, the team was loaded, the aircraft banked hard, and they were racing away from the kill zone at maximum speed. Kira watched through her scope as the helicopters disappeared into the mountain valleys, carrying the men she'd kept alive against impossible odds. Only when they were safely out of range did she allow herself to exhale fully for the first time in 23 minutes. Her hands were steady as she began the careful process of packing her equipment, but her mind was already calculating the cost of what she'd just done. Disobeying direct orders in combat,
engaging without authorization, turning off communications with command. Each violation was court-martial worthy on its own. Combined, they represented the end of her military career and possibly prison time. But 7 men were alive who wouldn't have been. That equation balanced itself in her mind, even if the military justice system would see it differently. The extraction helicopter arrived for her 30 minutes later. She fast roped up, and within moments, Ridge 7 was disappearing beneath them. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up, but his eyes held something between respect and uncertainty, like he wasn't sure if he was extracting a hero or a criminal. The flight back to FOB Sentinel took 18 minutes. 18 minutes for Kira to prepare herself for what was coming. Through the helicopter's window, she could see the base approaching, and she noticed something unusual. Personnel were gathered near the landing pad. Not the normal ground crew, but a crowd of people, watching, waiting. The helicopter touched down, and Kira stepped out into a wall of silence. Dozens of soldiers, Marines, and support personnel lined the tarmac, and they were staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but not welcoming either, just intense, searching, like they were trying to reconcile the person they were seeing with something they'd heard. Captain Hammond stood front and center, his face carved from stone, his body language radiating barely controlled fury. Behind him stood 2 military police officers, and the implications were clear. She was under arrest. Sergeant Vance, you are hereby placed under military arrest for willful disobedience of direct orders during combat operations, unauthorized engagement of enemy forces, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. You will surrender your weapon and accompany these MPs to confinement while charges are prepared. Kira unslung her rifle, holding it carefully, and handed it to one of the MPs. The weapon felt heavier than usual, like it knew its owner's career was ending. But before the MPs could take her away, Lieutenant Bridges pushed through the crowd, his face still streaked with dust and sweat from the operation. His team followed him, Kellaway, Watts, Romero, Hensley, even Thornton. They formed a line between Kira and the MPs. Captain Hammond, Bridges' voice carried absolute conviction, with all due respect, you cannot arrest this woman. Hammond's eyes narrowed. Stand down, Lieutenant. This is not your concern. Sergeant Vance violated direct orders that you witnessed over the radio. She saved our lives, Kellaway said, stepping forward. We were walking into a trap. She tried to warn us, and we dismissed her. If she'd followed your orders, sir, we'd all be dead right now. That's not the point, Hammond started. Then what is the point? Watts interrupted, his voice rising. The point is 7 American operators are standing here breathing instead of being shipped home in boxes. The point is she made shots that shouldn't be possible, eliminated 40-plus hostiles, and held off an overwhelming force with 1 rifle and limited ammunition. You want to court-martial that? Romero pulled out his helmet camera. I've got footage, sir, from my perspective during the operation. Want to see what it looks like when someone makes a 1,200-meter shot on moving targets in high wind? Want to watch her hit the driver of a moving vehicle at over 1,000 meters? Because I can show you, and then you can explain to a court-martial board why you ordered her to stop. Hammond's face was reddening. She turned off her communications. She violated direct orders during combat.
Because you weren't listening. Thornton's voice cracked across the tarmac like a whip. The man who'd mocked Kira mercilessly just hours before now stood as her defender, his face tight with emotion. She told you there was an observation post. You called it speculation. She said the compound was alerted. You dismissed it as normal activity. She tried to warn us 3 times, and you threatened her with charges if she spoke again. He stepped closer to Hammond, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. I was wrong about her, sir. Dead wrong. And I'll admit that to anyone who asks. But you were worse than wrong. You let your ego override tactical sense, and you almost killed us because of it.
The crowd had grown larger, and people were recording on their phones now. This confrontation was being documented, and Hammond seemed to realize that whatever happened next would define his career. Master Chief Garrett emerged from the operations center, carrying a folder. His weathered face was calm, but his eyes held something dangerous. "Captain Hammond," he said quietly, "before you proceed with these charges, you might want to review this." He handed over the folder. "Sergeant Vance's complete service record. Took me the last hour to pull with appropriate clearances, but I think you'll find it illuminating." Hammond opened the folder, and Kira watched the color drain from his face as he read. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. His hand began to tremble slightly. This is classified at TSSCI level," he said, his voice barely of a whisper. "Why is a sergeant's record classified at this level?" "Keep reading," Garrett suggested. Hammond flipped from pages, and with each one his expression shifted further from a righteous anger toward something that looked suspiciously like fear. Finally, he looked up at Kira, and there was a question in his eyes that he couldn't quite articulate. 47 confirmed eliminations. Special Operations Sniper Program, designation classified. Trained under code name Phantom. Strategic Asset Classification. He looked up. "What is this? What the hell is Phantom Protocol?" "It's the program that doesn't exist," Garrett said simply. "The one that trains snipers to make shots that our enemies believe are impossible. The one that operated in places where we officially never sent anyone. Sergeant Vance isn't just a sniper, Captain. She's one of 3 graduates from a program that was so classified, most flag officers don't know it existed." Bridges stared at Kira with new understanding. "Ghost Viper," he said quietly. "That's what they called them. I heard rumors when I was going through SEAL training. Snipers who could hit targets at ranges that violated physics. I thought it was bullshit. Operator mythology." "It's not mythology," a new voice said. Colonel Raymond Ashford walked across the tarmac, his uniform crisp despite having just flown in from Kabul. His presence commanded immediate attention. "Captain Hammond," he said, "before you proceed with these charges, you might want to review this." He handed over the folder. "Sergeant Vance's complete service record. Took me the last hour to pull with appropriate clearances, but I think you'll find it illuminating." Hammond opened the folder, and Kira watched the color drain from his face as he read. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. His hand began to tremble slightly. This is classified at TSSCI level," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why is a sergeant's record classified at this level?" "Keep reading," Garrett suggested. Hammond flipped through pages, and with each one his expression shifted further from righteous anger toward something that looked suspiciously like fear. Finally, he looked up at Kira, and there was a question in his eyes that he couldn't quite articulate. 47 confirmed eliminations. Special Operations Sniper Program, designation classified. Trained under codename Phantom. Strategic Asset Classification. He looked up. "What is this? What the hell is Phantom Protocol?" "It's the program that doesn't exist," Garrett said simply. "The one that trains snipers to make shots that our enemies believe are impossible. The one that operated in places where we officially never sent anyone. Sergeant Vance isn't just a sniper, Captain. She's one of 3 graduates from a program that was so classified, most flag officers don't know it existed." Bridges stared at Kira with new understanding. "Ghost Viper," he said quietly. "That's what they called them. I heard rumors when I was going through SEAL training. Snipers who could hit targets at ranges that violated physics. I thought it was bullshit. Operator mythology." "It's not mythology," a new voice said. Colonel Raymond Ashford walked across the tarmac, his uniform crisp despite having just flown in from Kabul. His presence commanded immediate attention. "Captain Hammond," he said, "before you proceed with these charges, you might want to review this."
He handed over the folder. Sergeant Vance's complete service record. Took me the last hour to pull with appropriate clearances, but I think you'll find it illuminating. Hammond opened the folder. Hammond straightened. Sir, with respect, she violated direct orders. She saved American lives while you were threatening her career for trying to do her job. Ashford cut him off. I've reviewed the helmet camera footage. I've listened to the radio traffic. I've read the after-action reports, and here's what I see. A highly trained specialist identified threats that your intelligence missed, warned you multiple times, and when you refused to listen, she made the hardest decision an operator can make. She chose to save lives over her career. He turned to face the assembled crowd. Sergeant Vance graduated from a program that I oversaw personally. She was trained by the best sniper this country has ever produced. Her skills are classified because they represent capabilities that our enemies should never fully understand. And today, she demonstrated exactly why that training exists. Hammond's jaw clenched. Then why was I not informed? Why send her on this operation without disclosing her qualifications? Because operators like Sergeant Vance work best when they're underestimated. And because, frankly, your ego needed checking. You assumed that because she didn't fit your image of what a special operations sniper should look like, she must be incompetent. You learned a hard lesson today, Captain. The quiet ones are often the most dangerous. The crowd was silent, absorbing this information. Kira stood perfectly still, her face impassive, but inside she felt something shifting. The career she thought was ending might not be over after all. But the confrontation wasn't finished yet.
The debriefing room was designed for classified discussions, soundproofed walls, no windows, and a single table surrounded by chairs that had seen countless post-operation reviews. Colonel Ashford sat at the head of the table, his laptop open, displaying footage from the helmet cameras. Captain Hammond sat to his left, his face still pale from the revelations of the past hour. Master Chief Garrett stood near the door, arms crossed, watching everything with the quiet intensity of a man who'd seen this story before. The SEAL team filled the remaining chairs, their gear removed, but their weapons still close. Combat didn't leave you quickly, and every one of them still carried the tension of men who'd survived something they shouldn't have. Lieutenant Bridges spoke first. Sir, I need to state for the record that Sergeant Vance's actions saved this entire team. Without her intervention, we would have been overrun and killed. Her warnings were accurate, her tactical assessment was correct, and her shooting was beyond anything I've witnessed in 15 years of special operations. Ashford nodded, tapping his keyboard. I've reviewed all the helmet camera footage. What I'm about to show you is compiled from multiple perspectives. This is what Sergeant Vance did today. The footage began playing. Through Calloway's helmet camera, they watched the approach to the compound, the sudden eruption of gunfire, the team pinned down against the north wall. Then, the enemy fighters on the rooftop began dropping, one after another, precise shots from an unseen position. That's 943 meters, Garrett said quietly. In variable wind, on moving targets. The footage shifted to Watts's perspective. The technical truck racing toward the compound, its mounted .50 caliber weapons swinging toward them. Then the driver's window exploded and the vehicle careened into the wall. 1,124 meters, Garrett continued. Moving target, one shot, driver neutralized. Romero's footage showed the mortar team on the western ridge, the methodical elimination of each fighter as they tried to complete their mission. 1,200 meters, Garrett said. 11 targets eliminated with 14 shots, in high wind, uphill. The footage continued, showing angle after angle of impossible shots, threats eliminated before the SEAL team even recognized them, coordinated enemy assaults broken by precise fire from a single rifle nearly a kilometer away. When the compilation ended, the room was silent. Even Hammond, who'd been resistant, sat with his mouth slightly open, the footage undeniable. Thornton spoke, his voice carrying shame and respect in equal measure. I mocked her, called her gear museum pieces, said she didn't belong. I was wrong about everything. We all were, Calloway admitted. I've operated with scout snipers, Marine Corps Force Recon, Delta Force. I've seen the best shooters this military has. Nobody shoots like that. Nobody. Hensley raised his hand tentatively. Sir, during the firefight, some of the enemy fighters were shouting about a ghost.
They couldn't see where the shots were coming from. They thought they were being hunted by something supernatural. Ashford smiled slightly. That's the point. Phantom Protocol operatives are trained to be exactly that. Ghosts. The enemy never sees them, never knows where they are, and by the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. He stood and walked to a map of Afghanistan pinned to the wall. Let me tell you about Phantom Protocol. It was established in 2006 by a sniper we called Ghost Viper. His real name is classified, his face has never been photographed for official records, and his existence is denied by every agency that ever employed him. But his legend is real. Ashford placed a finger on Kunar Province. Ghost Viper operated in these mountains for 3 years. Confirmed eliminations? 87. But intelligence estimates his actual count was over 200. He could shoot in conditions that made other snipers stay in their bunks. He could hold a position for days without moving, and he could make shots that violated every principle of ballistics and physics that we understood. Bridges leaned forward. I heard stories during SEAL training. Guys said there was a sniper in Afghanistan who once eliminated an entire Taliban command structure, 12 men in 12 shots, from a position over a mile away. They said it was impossible, just operator mythology. It happened, Ashford confirmed. Operation Silent Echo, 2008. I was the mission commander. Ghost Viper was the only shooter on Overwatch. The enemy never even knew they were under attack until everyone above the rank of squad leader was dead.
He pulled out a photograph, faded and worn. It showed a rifle, an M110, scarred and weathered. And on the stock, barely visible, were 3 parallel lines. This was his weapon. He carved those 3 lines into the stock before every mission, his signature. And when he retired in 2010, he passed this rifle to his only student, the only person he'd ever trained, the only operator he believed could carry on what he'd started. Ashford set the photograph on the table, and everyone could see it clearly now, the same 3 lines that were on Kira's rifle. Sergeant Kira Vance was 21 years old when Ghost Viper selected her for training, Ashford continued. She'd shown exceptional aptitude during basic sniper school. But more than that, she showed something he said was rarer than skill, absolute calm under pressure, the ability to make the hard decisions without hesitation. He pulled up another file on his laptop. For 3 years, she trained under him in locations that don't appear on any map. She learned techniques that exist nowhere in official doctrine. And when her training was complete, Ghost Viper did something he'd never done before. He gave her his rifle, carved his signature into it alongside hers, and told her she'd surpassed him. Watts shook his head in disbelief. She surpassed Ghost Viper? The legend who supposedly could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 meters? According to his final evaluation, Ashford read from the screen, student has achieved technical proficiency beyond instructor capability. Recommend immediate deployment to highest priority operations. Capabilities exceed all current military standards. Hammond finally found his voice. Then why is she here? Why is a strategic asset assigned to standard Overwatch on a SEAL operation? Why wasn't I informed about her capabilities? Because 3 years ago, Sergeant Vance requested standard duty rotation. She'd completed 6 classified operations, 47 confirmed eliminations, all in conditions that would have been impossible for normal snipers. And she was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. The weight of what she'd done, the people she'd eliminated, the missions that officially never happened, it was destroying her. He closed his laptop and looked at Kira, who'd been silent throughout the entire debriefing, sitting in the corner of the room like she'd rather be invisible. So I granted her request, Ashford continued. She went back to regular Army service, trained other snipers, did Overwatch for standard operations. She requested that her Phantom Protocol classification be sealed. She wanted to be normal, to not be the person who made impossible shots. Romero looked at Kira with new understanding. But you couldn't stay invisible. We walked into a trap, and you had to become that person again. Kira spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice quiet but steady. 7 lives versus my peace of mind.
That's not a difficult equation. Bridges stood and walked over to her. He extended his hand. Thank you for breaking your cover, for defying orders, for saving us. I'm sorry we dismissed you. I'm sorry we made assumptions. You're the best operator I've ever worked with, and I've worked with the best. One by one, the team members stood and offered their hands, their apologies, their respect. Even Thornton, whose face was red with shame, shook her hand and said simply, I was a fool. You're the everything I claimed to be, but never was. Hammond remained seated, staring at his hands. When everyone else had finished, he looked up at Kira and said, I almost had you arrested for saving lives. I threatened you with court-martial for doing your job better than anyone thought possible. I don't expect you to accept my apology, but I'm offering it anyway. Kira studied him for a long moment. You followed protocol, Captain. You weren't wrong to be angry about disobeyed orders. You were wrong to not listen when someone with expertise tried to warn you. Learn from that, and we're even. Ashford closed his files and stood. Captain Hammond, you'll note in your report that Sergeant Vance's actions were heroic and saved American lives. Any mention of charges is to be struck from all records. Lieutenant Bridges, your team performed exceptionally under impossible circumstances. And Sergeant Vance, he paused, looking at her with something that might have been fatherly pride. Your cover is blown. The entire base knows about you now, which means you have a choice to make.
The briefing room felt smaller now, the air heavy with expectation. Kira remained standing near the corner, her posture relaxed but alert, like she was still on overwatch, despite being surrounded by allies. Colonel Ashford opened another file on his laptop, this one marked with red borders, indicating the highest classification level. 3 weeks ago, I received intelligence about a network of foreign fighters operating in this region. Not Taliban, but professional soldiers from Chechnya, Pakistan, and Syria. They're training local fighters in advanced tactics, coordinating attacks across multiple provinces, and they're funded by sources we haven't been able to identify. He turned the screen to show a network diagram, faces connected by lines, locations marked in red. Today's operation wasn't just about eliminating Zaire Massoud. It was about confirming that this compound was a command hub. And thanks to the intelligence Lieutenant Bridges' team recovered, we now have proof. Bridges nodded. The computer drives we extracted contained communications, financial records, and operational plans. We're looking at a coordinated campaign across eastern Afghanistan. Exactly, Ashford confirmed. But here's the problem. This network operates like a hydra. We cut off one head and 2 more appear. They're decentralized, mobile, and extremely cautious. Traditional operations can't touch them because they see us coming. They have informants, surveillance, and they've learned to read our patterns. He closed the laptop and looked directly at Kira. They can't read what they don't know exists. They can't prepare for threats they don't believe are real. They've heard rumors about ghost snipers, but they dismiss them as psychological warfare, propaganda. Master Chief Garrett stepped forward from his position by the door. What the colonel is saying is that we need someone who can operate in the shadows, someone who can eliminate high-value targets without leaving evidence of American involvement, someone who can be everywhere and nowhere. Kira's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. She'd known this was coming the moment her cover was blown. You want me to go back, she said quietly. Back to Phantom Protocol. We need you to go back, Ashford corrected. Not forever. 6 months, 1 operation cycle. Help us decapitate this network before they launch their planned offensive. Intelligence suggests they're preparing something big. Coordinated attacks on multiple coalition bases designed to inflict mass casualties. Hammond, who'd been silent since his apology, spoke up. With respect, Colonel, hasn't Sergeant Vance earned the right to say no? She requested normal duty for her mental health. Forcing her back into that role seems... I'm not forcing anything, Ashford interrupted. This is entirely her choice, but she deserves to know what's at stake. He pulled up another file, this one showing casualty projections. If this network succeeds in their planned attacks, we're looking at an estimated 200 to 300 coalition casualties. American, British, Australian forces. Men and women who came here to serve, who have families waiting for them at home. The room went silent. The weight of those numbers hung in the air like smoke. Kira studied the projection, her face impassive. But everyone who knew anything about reading people could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. 200 to 300 lives versus her peace of mind. The same equation as before, just larger numbers. Corporal Diaz appeared in the doorway, hesitant to interrupt, but carrying a message. "Sir, there's someone here to see Sergeant Vance. He says it's urgent." "Who?" Garrett asked. "He wouldn't give his name, sir. Just said he trained with Ghost Viper. Said Sergeant Vance would know who he was." Everyone in the room tensed. There were only 2 other Phantom Protocol graduates, both as deeply classified as Kira. For one of them to appear here now meant something significant was happening. The man who entered the briefing room was in his mid-40s, weathered by years of operations in harsh environments. He wore civilian clothes, but he moved with the precise economy of motion that marked special operations soldiers. His eyes swept the room, cataloging threats and exits in a fraction of a second, before settling on Kira. "Vanguard," he said simply. It was a call sign, not a name. "Sentinel," Kira replied, recognizing him immediately. They'd never operated together, but Ghost Viper had introduced his students to each other exactly once, so they'd know they weren't alone in the world.
Vanguard nodded to Colonel Ashford. "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but I was tracking the same network you've been investigating. I've spent the last 3 months working my way into their supply chain, and I just received intelligence that their timeline has accelerated. They're not waiting 6 months for their offensive. They're launching in 3 weeks." The room erupted in urgent conversation, but Ashford raised his hand for silence. 3 weeks. That changes everything. We can't organize a conventional response that quickly. You'd need operators who can work independently, Vanguard said, who can identify and eliminate targets without extensive logistics support, who can be ghosts. He looked at Kira. "You'd need phantoms." Bridges stood up. "My team can work with them. We've seen what Sergeant Vance can do. Give us both phantom operators and we'll coordinate strikes across the network." "SEALs working with Phantom Protocol," Watts said, a slight smile crossing his face. "The enemy won't know what hit them." Kira walked to the map on the wall, studying the marked locations. Her finger traced lines between compounds, following the logic of the network. "They're using the river valleys for movement," she said quietly, "avoiding the high ground where they think we have surveillance. But that's also where they're vulnerable. Limited escape routes, predictable choke points." Vanguard joined her at the map. "I can identify which compounds are critical nodes. Take out the leadership and the network collapses, but the shots will be difficult. Long range, high wind, limited windows of opportunity." "Difficult shots are our specialty," Kira replied. She turned to face Ashford, and everyone in the room recognized the shift in her posture. This wasn't the quiet sergeant who'd been dismissed and mocked. This was Phantom, the operator who'd made impossible shots and saved countless lives. 6 months is too long. 3 weeks means we go fast, hit hard, and disappear before they can respond. I'll need complete operational autonomy, no interference from command unless requested, and updated intelligence every 6 hours. Ashford nodded. "Done. What else?" "Lieutenant Bridges and his team provide ground support if needed, but they stay out of the engagement zones. We don't want them associated with what's about to happen." She looked at the SEAL team. "This gets messy, and the shots we make won't follow the rules of engagement you're used to." Bridges met her gaze steadily. "After today, we trust you to make the calls. Just tell us what you need." Thornton stood up. "I want to apologize again, not just for mocking you, but for not recognizing what we had. You tried to warn us and we dismissed you because you didn't fit our image of what a shooter should be. That's on us." "Apology accepted," Kira said simply, "but learn from it. The next time someone who doesn't fit your preconceptions tries to warn you about something, listen. It might save your life." Calloway pulled up a chair. "Can you teach us? Not to shoot like you. I know that's years of specialized training, but the mindset, the way you read situations, the way you stayed calm when everything was falling apart." Kira considered the question.
The mindset isn't complicated. You assume nothing is as it seems. You trust your observations over official intelligence. And when you have to make a hard choice, you do the math. How many lives does this decision affect, and which choice saves more people? She looked around the room at faces that had gone from mockery to respect in the span of a single operation. But the hardest part isn't the shooting or the tactics, it's living with the choices after. It's knowing that you eliminated people who might have been fathers, brothers, sons. They were enemy combatants, but they were also human beings. And that weight doesn't go away just because you were following orders or saving lives. The room was silent, absorbing the truth of what she'd said. This wasn't just about impressive shooting or tactical excellence. It was about the psychological cost of being exceptionally good at killing. Hammond stood and faced Kira directly. I learned something today about assumptions and humility, but I also learned that sometimes the people who carry the heaviest burdens are the ones who show it the least. Whatever you decide about this mission, know that you've earned the right to choose. And if you need support, mental health, counseling, anything, I'll personally ensure you get it. Ashford closed his files. Sergeant Vance, take tonight to think about it. Tomorrow morning, we'll brief the operation if you're in. If you're not, we'll find another way. No pressure, no judgment. But everyone in the room knew what her answer would be. They'd seen it in her eyes when she looked at those casualty projections. Some people were built to carry heavy burdens, and Kira Vance was one of them.
3 weeks passed like a whisper through the mountains. The foreign fighter network never saw it coming. Command nodes were eliminated with surgical precision. Leaders found dead from shots that had traveled over a kilometer. Sentries eliminated without ever knowing they were in someone's crosshairs. Supply convoys disrupted by fire from positions that seemed to defy geography. The enemy called them jinn, demons from Islamic mythology. Supernatural beings that could appear and disappear, that could strike from nowhere and vanish like smoke. They stopped using their radios, convinced that the Americans had technology that could track their communications. They stopped moving in patterns, believing that predictability meant death. They became paralyzed by fear of an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't understand. In truth, it was 2 snipers working in coordination with a SEAL team that provided tactical support and extraction when needed. Nothing supernatural, just exceptional training, impossible dedication, and the willingness to carry a burden that most people couldn't comprehend. Kira stood on Ridge 7 one final time, watching the sun set over the Hindu Kush. The operation was complete. 17 high-value targets eliminated. The network's offensive prevented before it could launch. An estimated 247 coalition lives saved, according to intelligence analysis. Her radio crackled. Overwatch, this is Havoc 6. Extraction bird inbound. ETA 4 minutes. Copy, she replied, beginning to pack her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown that first day. Her rifle, Ghost Viper's rifle, now truly hers, rested across her knees. She ran her thumb over those 3 parallel lines carved into the stock, thinking about the man who'd trained her, who'd seen something in a young soldier that no one else had noticed. He told her once, during a night watch in a classified location that officially didn't exist. The world needs people who can make the hard choices, who can do the difficult things so others don't have to, but it will also judge you for those choices, even while it depends on you making them. That's the burden we carry, not the weight of the rifle, but the weight of being necessary and invisible at the same time. She understood now what he'd meant. She'd saved lives today, and 3 weeks ago, and during 6 classified operations before that. But her name would never appear in any citation. Her actions would never be acknowledged publicly. She would remain Sergeant Kira Vance, regular Army sniper, unremarkable and easily dismissed. And that was exactly how it needed to be. The Black Hawks settled on the ridge, and Kira climbed aboard. As they lifted off, she looked down at the mountains that had been her battlefield, her proving ground, and her burden. Back at Forward Sentinel, the base had changed in subtle ways. When Kira walked through the compound now, soldiers nodded respectfully, not because they knew the details of what she'd done, but because word had spread that the quiet sergeant with the old rifle had saved a SEAL team and prevented a major offensive. Captain Hammond had requested transfer to a staff position, not because he was punished, Colonel Ashford had kept his word about that, but because he'd learned something about himself that he didn't like.
He'd let ego and assumption override tactical judgment, and he'd nearly gotten good men killed. His final act before leaving was submitting a commendation for Kira that, due to classification, would be filed away where no one would ever read it. But he'd written it anyway because some things needed to be acknowledged, even if they couldn't be celebrated. The SEAL team was preparing for another deployment, but they'd asked specifically for Kira to provide overwatch if she was available. Lieutenant Bridges had even started a training program at the base, teaching young soldiers about recognizing expertise regardless of appearances, about listening to warnings from people who might not fit conventional molds. Thornton had become one of the program's most effective instructors, sharing his own experience as a cautionary tale. I mocked the person who saved my life. I dismissed her expertise because she didn't look like what I expected. Don't make my mistake. Respect is earned through competence, not conformity. Master Chief Garrett found Kira in the armory 3 days after the operation concluded. She was cleaning her rifle, the familiar ritual that seemed to center her. "Got something for you," he said, handing her a plain envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed a man in his 60s with weathered features and eyes that held decades of difficult choices. He was standing in front of mountains that could have been anywhere, and he was smiling slightly, the kind of smile that suggested pride and satisfaction.
Ghost Viper, Garrett explained. He asked me to give this to you if you ever had to go back to Phantom Protocol. Said you'd understand what it meant. Kira studied the photograph. Her teacher, the legend who'd trained her, who'd given her his rifle and his knowledge, the man who'd seen potential in her that no one else had recognized. On the back of the photograph, written in the same distinctive handwriting she'd seen in training logs years ago, was a simple message. You were always ready. I just needed you to believe it. Proud of you. G.V. She tucked the photograph into her pocket, next to the crumpled range pass that Commander Hayes had thrown at her feet during that first operation. 2 pieces of paper, 2 reminders of different kinds of people, those who judged by appearances and those who saw deeper. Corporal Diaz appeared in the armory doorway, hesitant as always. "Sergeant Vance, there's some new arrivals on base, young snipers, just out of training. They heard about what happened, and they're asking if they could talk to you, get some advice." Kira looked up from her rifle. She thought about all the times she'd been dismissed, underestimated, mocked. She thought about the SEAL team that had learned to look past assumptions. She thought about her teacher, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "Tell them I'll meet them at the range in an hour. And tell them to bring their questions, real questions, not the ones they think I want to hear." As Diaz left, Garrett smiled. "You know what you're starting, right? You're going to become the person that young snipers look up to, the legend they tell stories about." "No," Kira corrected quietly. "I'm going to be the person who reminds them that skill matters more than appearance, that quiet competence beats loud confidence, and that the hardest part of this job isn't making the shot. It's living with it afterward." She finished cleaning her rifle and stood, slinging it over her shoulder. "Ghost Viper taught me that being exceptional at something doesn't mean you have to announce it. It means you do the work when it matters, regardless of whether anyone's watching or applauding. That's what I'll teach them." 1 week later, Kira received orders for her next assignment. Standard rotation, regular duty, nothing classified. She'd be training snipers at a forward operating base in Hindu Province, teaching the fundamentals that would keep them alive. But attached to the orders was a note from Colonel Ashford. "Phantom Protocol remains active if needed. You know how to reach us. Until then, teach the next generation what it means to be a professional. They need role models who show them that strength comes in many forms. R.A." The morning she left Forward Sentinel, the entire SEAL team lined up to see her off. No ceremony, no fanfare, just quiet respect between professionals who'd learned to recognize excellence when they saw it. Bridges shook her hand. "Thank you for saving our lives. Thank you for teaching us humility. And thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." As the convoy pulled out of the base, Kira looked back one last time at the mountains where she had defied orders, saved lives, and reminded an entire community that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. Her teacher had been right. The world needed people who could make hard choices, who could carry heavy burdens, who could be ghosts when necessary,
But it also needed people who could teach the next generation that respect wasn't about appearances or credentials. It was about character, competence, and the courage to do what was right even when it cost everything. Somewhere in those mountains, enemy fighters still whispered about the jinn who hunted them. But on American bases across Afghanistan, young soldiers were learning a different lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never dismiss expertise because it doesn't fit your expectations. And always, always listen when someone with knowledge tries to warn you. Some victories weren't measured in confirmed eliminations or operations completed. They were measured in changed perspectives, in lessons learned, in the moment when arrogance gave way to respect. And as Kira Vance disappeared back into the ordinary routine of military life, carrying her scarred rifle and her heavy knowledge, she knew that sometimes the greatest impact wasn't made with impossible shots. It was made by showing people that true strength didn't need to announce itself, it just needed to be there when it mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.